Warren Cariou is the author of a number of books, including The Exalted Company of Roadside Martyrs, Lake of the Prairies, a memoir which won the 2002 Drainey Taylor Prize for Biography, and it was also shortlisted for the Charles Taylor Prize. And he's also released a documentary film entitled Land of Oil and Water. He's a professor of English at the University of Manitoba, where he's also Canada Research Chair in Narrative, Community, and Indigenous Cultures. And he grew up in a farm near Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. Do we have any folks in the audience from Saskatchewan here? Yay! Okay. And he's done all sorts of work over his life, including as a construction laborer, a technical writer, political advisor, and I'm sure many other things that are not on this bio. I've had the pleasure of hearing him read and talk many times, and it's a real joy to welcome him.
Thanks very much, Rita, and thanks to everyone for being here. I think what I would like to do is read a little bit, and then maybe we have a chance for a bit of a discussion, and then if there's time, we'll maybe play a short version of my film Land of Oil and Water. There's a 15-minute version called Overburden, and so we could maybe talk a bit about about writing versus film and questions of media and that kind of thing as well, if that's interesting to you. But I thought I would begin with a new piece. This is I'm not quite sure what this is yet exactly. It's a story that looks like it might be long enough to be a novel, but I'm not totally sure yet. So the story is. I'll just give you a brief little bit of a setup. It's set in 1914. The narrator is speaking to his children and to their children, and he's talking about a time in 1884 when he, as you'll learn, when he signed up as an Aboriginal man, a Métis man who signed up with the British Army to go on a military expedition in Egypt, and this is a historical case that many people don't know about. That about 300 Aboriginal men were conscripted, I guess, into the British Army to do this, and these are all Canadian Aboriginal men and some other non-native men from Canada as well, who went on this journey into Khartoum to rescue the British General Gordon, who was the last white man in Khartoum, and they sent 10,000 British troops to rescue one white guy who was stuck in Khartoum, which was under siege by this the Mahdist rebellion, they called it. So that's the sort of larger story that's at work here. But this is just the beginning of the story, and as I said, the narrator is a Métis man who has never told anyone about this experience until this point in his life. And so here's the beginning of it. It's called The Riverman. My sons, we gave tobacco to the water today, your sister and me. We spoke your names and asked that you travel well, and prayed that you come back to us with whole bodies, whole spirits. And then I opened my pouch and sprinkled the medicine over the stern of the boat, and we watched it float downstream, turning in slow circles, following the path of the current. It floated away from the direction you went, and away from where we are going. Yet I know its medicine travels with each one of us. All rivers flow both ways. My Mosum taught me that, and I showed you many times on this old Athabasca. Your sister is just learning, but she'll understand it soon. She has a good eye for the water, and she listens good too. You'll see tomorrow, Isla. If you look close at the edge of the rapids, sometimes you'll notice those curls in the water, those eddies moving back against the current. If you know how to recognize them, you can learn to use them to your advantage. That's how a good riverman can paddle downstream in both directions much of the time. And it's how I know the medicine travels with us, no matter which way we go. It's like that with stories, too. They move from person to person and back again, sometimes in ways we can't see. Even when we don't want to tell them, they're moving under the surface, always swirling, eddying. Say you have a story that stays in your mind, a secret memory you've never been able to get rid of. like a deer fly that keeps returning to that same place on the back of your neck. You might tell yourself, that's in the past now. I don't need to think about that anymore or tell anyone about it. But you never know when a story is going to circle back on you, especially when it's gone untold. That's what I've been thinking of these days since you boys signed up to be soldiers and left us here. The day you left, I was too angry to see that until it was too late. I watched the three of you walking away through that half-burnt town, carrying your bedrolls and rifles, moving toward the smoldering train that would take you away to this war we don't even have a name for. And I suddenly understood. This was my story. It was telling itself again. If I could have caught up to you right then, maybe I would have told you the whole thing myself, and perhaps that would have stopped you from going. But you know my leg is no good on land anymore, and anyway, I was probably still too proud to tell it even then. Besides, I had your blood on my fist, Leontine. My own son's blood. How could I expect you to listen after I'd done that? When the three of you reached the burnt-down factor's house at the end of the street, I looked down at my hand and saw the red there, and knew it wasn't my own. I thought of your mother, how ashamed she would be, how I had failed her by letting you do something I knew was so wrong. If she had been alive, I know she would have been able to help you, to help keep you here. She would have steered me away from my anger, helped me to be the father that I wasn't. I thought about that as the three of you disappeared into the dark doorway of that train, and I'm not ashamed to say that I wept there on the bank of my river, with a half-built boat behind me and that half-demolished town in front. The boat builders saw me, Alexis Grant, old Jeremiah Fiddler, the Negro Samuel, but I didn't care. I stood for a long time with tears dripping down onto my boots, listening to the unstoppable sound of the idling train and the shouts of men loading cargo. I watched for your faces in the windows but didn't see you. Who could blame you for sitting on the other side, looking out at the newly cultivated land, thinking about your future? I have always hated trains. I came up to this place to get away from them. Wherever they come, they bring grief. I used to say that to your mother, and she believed me, though she never saw one in her life. As this one sighed and shuddered and finally shoved off, taking with it 3/4 of what she and I had made in our lives, I lifted my right hand up to my mouth, touched that blood to my tongue. Rust and iodine and river water. I swear I can still taste it now. Today we started traveling back to the place you left from, that town of charred buildings and smoke-breathing trains, Athabasca Landing. It's just the two of us, Isla and me, in this scow built for 5 or 6 men, the one that Alexis Grant was building for us when you left. It's less than a quarter loaded, just a few summer muskrat furs and some tanned moose hides and beaded moccasins made by the old women at Gardapi's. But even so, we know the travel will be hard. If anyone saw us, they would laugh. An old man and a girl trying to pilot a big boat like this, 200 miles upstream during the low water time, and with winter coming on so soon. But no one has seen us yet. The river is quieter than I've ever known it. Ever since the company sent their steamer down through the rapids and took off north toward Fort Chipewyan, the trade has almost disappeared. You were right about that, Isidore. Everything is different now on this river. Maybe the three of you felt you had to go to war just to make a living. So that's why we have to make this trip in the first place, because the steamer is gone and the trade has gone with it. We might have enough supplies for ourselves over the winter, but the old people camped in Gardapi's place are going to need tea and flour and lard now that he has gone off to be a soldier too. Everyone who depended on that steamer is in trouble. Isla and I are planning to bring back as much food as we can afford, because we know there will be others along the river who don't even know that there's a war on, and everything has changed. We're hoping to find news of you, too, when we get to Athabasca Landing. Maybe a letter, though I know you aren't ones for writing. If not a letter, then maybe some word from Jameson in the telegraph office, or at least a newspaper report about our Northern Alberta soldiers and what they're doing now. You might still be in Edmonton, or you might already be on the far side of that huge, huge ocean, marching toward the Germans. I was half expecting that some sergeant would take a dislike to your Nehiao faces and send you all back home, but you've all been gone long enough that they must have accepted you. Maybe you're traveling on a ship right now, learning new things about what water can do to a man's stomach and his head. Wherever you are, I hope at least you're together. It's a terrible thing to travel so far without your brothers. Leontine, Isidore, Ambroise, I'm telling you this because I want you to understand why I was so angry that day you left, why I said those things about stupidity and treason, why I did what sickens me to remember, raising my hand against my youngest son, knocking him to the ground. Nothing excuses what I did, but you deserve to know what was in my mind at the time, the story I've kept secret from everyone all these years, even your mother. The story I see circling back to me now, becoming real again in your lives. Maybe it's too late to tell it. Maybe if I'd told you when you were young boys, you would have chosen differently when that Englishman came around, talking about patriotism and duty. But if I can't stop you from making that mistake, then at least I hope someday my grandchildren or their grandchildren will hear the story and it will make a difference for them. I'm telling it now to Isla because she deserves to know too, and because I might not be here to tell you myself by the time you come back home. I'm an old man, as all of you boys reminded me the last time you saw me, and the three of you are gone away to a fight that might take years. So Isla will be my story keeper. We gave tobacco again this evening to recognize her promise. In the coming years, my words will live in her, and when the time is right, she will pass them on to you and to anyone else who needs them. I realize now that she was born to do this, with her quick memory, her gift for languages. She's like my father in that way. I speak to her now in my old Michif tongue, and perhaps she will tell it back to you in your mother's Nehiawewin, or in the English we speak to the traders on the river, or the old Francais we speak to Gardapi's people. And one day I know she will tell her own children, and yours too, in whatever language they need to hear it in. And then maybe at some point, one of them will write it down, so that more people can learn from what happened in my life. I would like that. I want it shared. After you boys went away, I came to realize that this thing I have tried to keep to myself, this secret that has half destroyed my family, is all I have left to give you. On the day you left, I told you that this war wasn't your war, that your responsibility was at home and that you were traitors to your family if you went away. Of course, that didn't make sense to you. You told me I was crazy and out of touch and lost in the past. You said I didn't comprehend the world as it is today, that everything is changing and we need to make a stand, to join in with the new way or be orphaned in the old. Maybe there is some truth to that, although it sounds to me like empty words, Englishmen's words. Maybe my time has passed. But what you have to understand is that when I said those things to you, I was talking to myself. I was thinking back to a time 30 years ago when I started a journey much like yours, when I signed up for a cause that seemed like the perfect way to prove my courage, to show the world that I was something other than a dirty half-breed. Yes, I was a soldier then. Not the kind you might imagine, not in any war you would have heard about, but still a soldier. I had a gun and a uniform. I had enemies and comrades in arms. My regiment, if you want to call it that, had a special mission. We were rivermen, voyageurs, in the service of Her Majesty Queen Victoria, and we traveled across the ocean to lead an expedition up the most treacherous river I have ever seen, through cataracts and channels that no boat had ever passed, the River Nile. Your father was a riverman in Egypt, the land of the pyramids, the birthplace of Moses. We led 10,000 British soldiers on a mission to save the city of Khartoum and to rescue the last Englishman from what he had found there. And most of us, believe it or not, were Indians. Haudenosaunee, Nishnabeg, even a few Nehiawak and Métis like me. Our superiors called us the Caughnawagas, or sometimes our Indians. And we were famous for our skill, and yes, sometimes even our courage. The Queen herself thanked us when the mission came to an end. You don't believe me, Isla, do you? You should see her now, my sons, your serious sister. She's grinning, almost laughing now, the way she does when she thinks I'm telling a good one. Who can blame her for thinking that the old man has lost his mind or turned into a full-time liar? But it's true. Nothing I've said in my life is more true. my girl. Here, look at this. I keep him always at the bottom of my pouch, nestled in the tobacco, my little stone dog. He's a bit damp now from all that time in the pouch, but feel how smooth he is, how warm. And see the shape of his head, the big upright ears, the wide grinning muzzle. There's something about him that looks wild, powerful, not like a dog at all. If I asked you what he was, you might say a coyote. But he isn't a coyote or a dog. He's a jackal. I saw many of those jackals along the Nile, feeding on rotting carcasses, picking clean the bones. They waited sometimes outside our campsites, staring at us with their big wet eyes, maybe wondering which of us was going to die next. I came to respect them for their persistence, their patience. And so when an Arab man came up to me in Edfu and opened a cloth in his hand to show me 4 tiny black stone jackals, I gave him 20 shillings for one. Later I learned that the jackal was also one of the Egyptians' gods in the old time. Anubi, they called him. He's the one who helps people in their journey over to the other world. Of course, my little stone dog doesn't prove anything about my story. He could have come from anywhere. He could be a dog or a coyote or even a badly carved wolf. But if you look through my things back home, you'll find more. Look in my papers box, underneath all the shipping manifests and accounting books, and you'll find a package wrapped up in old paper and tied with rawhide string. When you unwrap it, you'll see that the paper is a map of Egypt, with the Nile hanging down into Nubia like a dried umbilical cord, curling to a knot where Khartoum is. I've marked on it many of the places we stopped in our 1,600-mile journey upstream. And wrapped inside that map is a small book called Our Kanawagas in Egypt, written by a Haudenosaunee chief who came along with us and was one of our best leaders. The book tells some good stories of our journey, but there were many other things that Chief Jackson either didn't know about or didn't want to put in a book. I'll have to tell you about them myself. I brought other keepsakes of the journey too, but they're gone now, thrown away, or maybe just misplaced. I used to have a fragment of paper called papyrus, with picture writing on it from a time before Moses. And I had some newspaper clippings from the London Times and the Daily Mail. At one time, I had a dervish knife, a dagger with a handle wrapped in rawhide cord, and an Arabic word gleaming on the blade. I buried it at my brother's grave. And somewhere in the muddy depths of the Saskatchewan Sippy near my old home, there is a medal that used to belong to me. A ribbon tied to a shiny bronze coin with Queen Victoria's head on one side and 2 metal bars above it, printed with the words Kirbekan and the Nile, 1884 to 85. And on the other side of the coin is a strange creature that has a woman's face and the body of a lion. A sphinx. Have you ever heard of that? When I first saw one, I thought of McCookum's stories of the Rougarou, part human and part beast. The old Egyptians used to pray to those sphinxes for something, for good luck maybe, for their old people to be at rest in the other world. I don't really know. I remember on our way back home, on that almost unending trip across the ocean, I studied that sphinx on my medal for hours at a time, wondering what those ancient people prayed to her for. All I knew for sure was that when I flipped the medal over, the face of that sphinx was the same as the face of the British Queen. That medal is gone forever now. No one will ever see it except maybe the jackfish and muskrats and mud puppies. And even the bits of evidence that remain are far from being conclusive. I see now that they might not impress you at all. They might not convince you of anything. But I suppose that's how it always is. Every story must be its own proof. I have to trust that as you listen, you will come to believe. So, listen. It's all I ask of you, my sons and all my relations. Listen to my story. Take from it any teachings you can find. So I'll stop there. Thanks. Sure. So sure. Whatever you prefer, yeah. Sure. I'm about halfway now. So. Sure, yeah, I guess I should have contextualized this a little bit more. As Rita mentioned, I grew up in northern Saskatchewan. My family is a very mixed ancestry, but my father was Métis. So, and then the community I grew up in is more than half Aboriginal and Métis people. So I've been very closely connected and very interested in Aboriginal culture for a long time. And in my own academic work, it's mostly on Aboriginal literature and storytelling. So yeah, it sort of grows out of my own, growing up in a family of storytellers, of Métis storytellers. That old man's voice is very much a voice that I heard growing up too. So that's, yeah, I think the short answer. Yeah, thanks.
When you started writing this, you said that it looks like it's going to become a novel. Did you start it thinking it might be something shorter, and did it just gradually emerge? Yeah,
I wasn't really sure. I mean, I guess the topic is pretty big. I mean, in terms of just the amount of just the event. There's so many events that occur in that process. I just wasn't quite sure how to approach it. And I was thinking it might be like a novella-length piece, but I think it is going to be longer than that now. Well, it will be, because I've already written a novella worth and it's nowhere near finished. So yeah, and it is just something that, for me, I don't really sort of plan to write a thing of a certain length. And I actually usually prefer to write the shorter the better, because there's more chance I'll actually, have the sustained attention to finish it. But I think it is got to the stage where it's probably going to be at least a couple hundred pages, if not, sort of 300 pages. So.
Is the book you described, is it a real book that was written? And
yeah.
Did you rehearse it, or?
Yeah, that's it's a book called Our Caughnawagas in Egypt by this Chief Jackson, Haudenosaunee chief, and this is how I originally even learned about this, that this had even occurred. I'm part of an editing collective that where it's called First Voices, First Texts, and we're searching basically for Aboriginal writing that has been lost or underappreciated. And so we've just been going back and looking in published works and also unpublished archival works too. And so that early in the process, this title came up, and I thought, that's interesting. I didn't know anything about it, so I just ordered a copy of it from the archives, and it's tantalizing. It's a very incomplete story. It's only about 40 pages long, and it is a very positive spin on what happened. And it's about being proud of these Aboriginal soldiers who are going and they're being valued by the British Army, which interestingly, not very long before that, the British Army had been sent in 1869-70 to challenge Riel's claim and challenge the Métis' claim to their own sovereignty. So, and of course, one of the things that also really interested me about it is this happens in 1884 and into 1885, and all these Aboriginal soldiers are, hired to go along, and actually, when they're still in Egypt, the Riel resistance occurs. So to me, that's the other part of the story, and I haven't finished that part yet, but to me, it's this sort of strange Heart of Darkness thing that they do with these Aboriginal men going into Africa. It's totally bizarre. But then the other side of it is they come back, and some of these are Métis men. Like this character of mine is very much based on real people who did this. They come back, and they're now being attacked, and their own Batoche is under siege, just like Khartoum was. So this crazy kind of colonial mirroring that's going on. So that's what I think. I think this is really an interesting sort of subtext for what happened to the Métis people, actually. I think if Khartoum hadn't turned out the way it did, and spoiler here is that they didn't get there in time. Khartoum fell, right, and General Gordon was killed. And I think if that hadn't happened, that I think the treatment of the Métis may have been very different. But there was this sudden paranoia in the British Empire. We can't have these resistances happening right now, and so the reaction against the Métis was very powerful, and much out of proportion to what you would have expected in relation to any other kind of resistance movements a little bit earlier. So yeah, to me, I think this is actually a part of Métis history that really hardly anyone knows about. So I'd like to fill that part in as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really we grew up learning what this nation was, right?
Yeah.
It's an excuse to bring a railroad in there.
Exactly, yeah. But I think I think it really was a part of, like, the British Empire's, just sort of the beginning points really of a kind of disintegration that's starting to happen, right? And it's the global nature of the empire is becoming really, is becoming manifest partly because of communication technology, because the telegraphs were so, efficient at that time. And this is also one of the reasons that I find the story fascinating is there's so much record of it, because the reporters that were going along on the journey were reporting back to London. So people in London were reading in the newspaper that day what happened the previous day. Most of the soldiers had no idea what was going on, like people along the river, but everyone in London knew. So that centralization and I think that affects sort of policy throughout the British Empire in a new way because of.
So obviously researching that was part of your practice.
Yeah, very much. So it really started out as a kind of archival or bibliographic thing when I discovered this book by Chief Jackson. But then I started looking around at all the other material, and there's a huge amount of material. Most of the generals and even some of the lower down officials in the campaign published books within a year of returning because there was such an appetite for it in Britain. So there's lots of material to draw on. So it's really been interesting to do that research as well, and really it helps a lot to immerse obviously in the time to be able to read journals and things like that that are about this expedition. So yeah, it's been really fun. That's a good question. Sometimes it's almost, you get to the point where it's more fun to just keep researching. And I do have to put limits on it and just to help me to get the story moving forward. Because it is, I think, sometimes researching is so much fun and you can convince yourself that you're working. But at a certain point you have to move forward with the story too. So yeah, I've tried to make it so that I also imagine. I have to imagine, even no matter how much research I do, I still have to imagine my character's place in that story. So I try to sort of push myself to keep moving forward in the writing, knowing that I may have to revise things a bit if I read some historical document that sort of changes that, or I may decide to just in fact fudge the history a little bit in order for the story to work better too. But
do you find that reading the real events that happened, like the real characters who were really there, like end up mirroring too much of like what really was happening?
yeah, in a way, it's interesting because when I first started this part of the story, I hadn't done a whole lot of that research about the cartoon part of the story, and it was actually only sort of by accident I started looking up some of the stories of the individual Aboriginal men who went there, and most of them there's not a whole lot known about them, but it was after I had already written this that I had a fairly clear picture of what this character, what his life was like in Manitoba and in Saskatchewan where his family moved after 1870. But anyway, I found historical documents of a man whose position was extremely similar, but I had already written this, but it's like this character was someone I had sort of imagined he would exist, and he did. So that was sort of neat to see that. But yeah, I think sometimes when it comes to inventing characters, sometimes you're lucky to have a historical document that gives you a sense of someone's individuality, and so you can sort of build on that. But I think other times you've got to make them an individual just by imagining too. So I think it's going to work both ways. And sometimes I've found, like for some of the other characters in the journey, I found, in the historical documents, like, okay, yeah, that's a person that I really want to be part of the story, because I think it's sort of important in terms of, moving the plot forward or just underlining something about a theme that I wanted to highlight. So yeah, it's great. It can really be a great inspiration to do this, that kind of historical work. But I think at the same time, you still have to. It's still a work of imagination. I still have to imagine my way into the characters and make them believable. Because just to tell someone, hey, that was a real person, doesn't make it any more believable in the novel. Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Yes.
Sometimes when I'm painting, I find the painting takes over. Do you ever find that in your writing that your characters take over? And how do you deal with that? Do you just let them say, okay, go, and then go back and edit? Or do you
I think sometimes, I would probably I feel you're a bit out of control, and I don't necessarily like that at first. But I also find, I think it's usually a good sign. If my character does something that embarrasses me, I usually think that's a good sign. That they've got some life of their own, right? If the character just does something that I wasn't expecting, usually I want to try and go with that and see where that's leading. And try to give myself permission to just see that as an experiment and say I can always go back to the draft I had before if I find that this is going off the rails. But because I think it is so much about, when you're especially when you're writing it from the point of view of a narrator, like I'm doing there, I have to let him tell the story to a certain extent. And so it is giving up a bit of your own control in a way. And then maybe later you'll have to come back as an editor and decide, oh wait, this has to be shaped a little differently. But yeah, I think it's really important actually to let that process go and to let the character tell their story, or let the character do what they seem to be wanting to do in the context.
How do you send film?
Yeah.
She said you do documentary.
Yeah, and I've never done drama film where you're setting things up ahead of time and where you've got a script. So with documentary, in a way, I guess you set up an interview and you don't really know what the person's going to say. I think a lot of times, the documentarian thinks they know what the person will say. In fact, they almost want the person to say their sound bites so they can get out of there and go on to the next interview. But I found actually that in some times just leaving the camera rolling and just let the person sort of answer the question, but then let them just talk a bit. That's really often where you get the best material. So in a way, it's sort of a similar thing. It's just sort of getting out of that situation where the interviewer just wants something out of the person, and just let them be who they are, let them tell their story, and then you find, I think, something more genuine comes up. That sort of artificiality of the interview situation falls to the side a little bit. So yeah, I think there is actually a kind of interesting parallel there. Yeah.
So when we introduced you, I forgot to mention that you've been working on this novel called Exhaust,
Yeah.
which is around the oil industry. And I was talking to somebody who said, "When is that novel coming out? We've been waiting for years."
I know, yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, this is a segue into maybe we can watch 15 minutes of the film, but
Sure.
a little bit about the difference between writing something that's set in contemporary moments versus
Yeah.
in this one, which we just
Yeah, that's great. The novel Exhaust, which is, I've been working on for a long time, and I keep thinking I'm almost done, and then my editor says, well, you're actually not quite done yet. So I've got to go back to the drawing board in a few sections of that. But while I was waiting to hear back from my editor, I started on this, which was probably a bad idea, but anyway. So that, also in the process of working on that novel, it's really about oil sands and about just about the place of oil in our culture. But it was set in the present day, and I kept having a problem with, I literally had it set in the present moment, and things would happen, and I'd say, okay, I gotta accommodate that, and I'd go back and have to revise, and it sort of felt like trying to write the history of the present moment, when the present moment is always moving. It's a strange moving target. So that was a bit of a difficult thing. And that was, I think, in a way, was partway through that process that I decided to make the film, and also because I sort of felt like with the novel, I have my own opinions about things and a sort of activist agenda, but I did find that doesn't work so well as an operating principle of a novel. But I think it worked fine as an operating principle of a documentary. So I wanted to do that, and just try and get sort of distill that sort of aspect of the story out. And also, I was really, with a novel, there's a sense that it's a version of reality, but it doesn't have necessarily the same, sort of political resonance sometimes. With a documentary, you've got the people right there telling you what their experience is, and I think there is something visceral that people experience when they hear that and see that. So that was why I thought documentary was a good venue for this. And I had no experience whatsoever making films when I started this. I just went and I'd seen some of the stuff that you're going to see in this short clip. And I was talking to my friend who is a filmmaker, and I said, really, somebody's got to make a film about this. This was before all the other films had been made about the oil sands, but ours is just focusing on Aboriginal people in the oil sands, and no one really has done that. And he just said, well, let's do it. And so a few months later, we were going with the film crew up to the oil sands, and we had an amazing experience with interviewing people who were so eloquent and so powerful in the things that they said. So we were really very lucky to be welcomed by these incredible, resilient people. So you'll see a little bit of that here if you want to. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, so this is a short version of the film that only focuses on two Alberta Aboriginal communities. Well, it's fairly clear. The longer film deals with Saskatchewan as well, where oil sands development is expanding into Saskatchewan, to my hometown, which is why I really started working on this in the first place. So this is just the Alberta side. These are communities that have lived with oil sands development for about 30 years.
I've watched the whole film, which is a bit longer. This version of it is interesting. It's really focused in on Alberta.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you talk a little bit about Saskatchewan, because that's
Sure.
actually the thing that's going on in the larger.
Yeah, exactly, and that's as I said, the impetus really to do this was because my hometown is basically going to be affected because the oil sands companies have been moving. They've discovered that the oil sand is present also in Saskatchewan in quite significant amounts. So they're moving over across the border to all across northwestern Saskatchewan. And
What would that do to all the national parks and the solution in Saskatchewan's national parks?
yeah, they're. I think some of it certainly is in the park areas. I'm not sure whether they have been seeking any leases there or not, but a lot of that land is now definitely under lease, or they're negotiating for leasing. Yeah. So yeah, basically, one of the things I wanted to do in making this film was to go and ask people in my hometown, in the small communities north of there, what they're expecting. And these are communities that have very high unemployment, and a lot of the social problems that come with that. And so some of them, are justifiably, I think they want sort of a slice of the capitalist pie themselves, right? They think, well, why can't we have good jobs like people in South do? So we went and talked to them, and we wanted to see, what they were hopeful for and what they were afraid of. And I really felt for them, that I think they deserve better than what they've got so far in the way things have worked out for them in relation to, especially for the Aboriginal people there. And the economy that used to be based on furs is pretty much gone now, so there's not a lot of other economic base for them. Anyway, so we went and we asked them, and certainly some were optimistic. A lot of them also just said, well, we can't stop this. This is so huge. What can we possibly do? So let's just see if we can get a good deal, basically, But then when we went to Alberta, one of the things that we asked all the Aboriginal people there that we interviewed was, what advice would you give to people in my hometown? And I think that was a really interesting question for them, and a lot of them really, I think, put a lot of thought into that. And a lot of times what they were saying is, now is the time you can make arrangements, right? A lot of them said in Alberta, like, it's too late for us now. Basically, once the companies have their leases, they can do what they want for the most part. So they said until they get the lease, they actually have to do a little bit of consultation. And so they were really advising people in Saskatchewan to be sure you get some kind of arrangement or agreement from the companies, and also to do a study, a baseline study of what is out there right now. What kind of wildlife is part of your land base, and what kind of practices do you do that are important on the land, because oil sands in Alberta, it affects the Aboriginal people's way of being on the land in a huge way. They're not allowed to go out onto their own trap lines until they go with an oil company representative, because the oil company says, well, it's dangerous for you to go out there by yourself. I mean, yes, maybe they shouldn't be there in the first place because it is dangerous, right? So yeah, that was I think it's actually helped in a way to get the people from Saskatchewan to start talking to their neighbors in Alberta. They're not really very far apart at all physically, but there's no roads there. So they don't, and in fact, many of them are related to each other too, but they just don't actually have a lot of communication because of the lack of transportation. So I think they're now really talking more. And so hopefully that will help, because some of the activist folks, especially in Fort Chip, some of the guys like Michael Mercury at the end of the film there, they've been really doing amazing stuff to try and get some visibility to what's going on there. But I think the Saskatchewan people can learn a lot from them to get the visibility now, while they're still negotiating with these companies, to try and shame them basically into giving a much better deal, or at least doing their due diligence that that the companies in Alberta certainly didn't. Yeah.
Have you tried looking at this from a larger scale too, instead of just viewing the local governments? Have you tried looking at it in maybe provincial or even overall Canadian government?
We didn't do that because we sort of decided we would just focus on local responses, but certainly there are a lot of other really interesting work being done on the provincial and national level. There's a number actually of really interesting other documentaries about the oil sands. So there's one called Downstream. That's really good. Petropolis is an amazing film as well, which is just visual views of the oil sands, sort of aerial views, like sort of like what we got, but much more, just that's all it is. And it's H2 oil. So yeah, there's a whole. In fact, someone in the States is proposing to do a tar sands film festival because there's now so many films on it. So it's quite interesting. I think all of them tell a different part of this incredibly huge story. So of course, like this, the greenhouse gases. If you look at there on the internet, there are greenhouse gas maps of the world. If you look, you can look at, so it'll be in color, and pink is the color of the most extreme greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at Beijing, and you see this huge pink spot, look at Fort McMurray, it's just the same. And so we just see the scale of just of the greenhouse gas emissions that's coming directly out of that plant. So it's such an enormous issue that I'm glad that a lot of other documentarians and other artists have been approaching it, because it's not something that any one documentary could really encompass. Yeah, so that's a great question. Yeah.
Is one of the companies involved Shell?
Yes, Shell has, they haven't, they're not producing oil yet, but actually a lot of these companies own each other as well, and I think actually Suncor is part owned by Shell now that I think about it, but Shell also has bought huge leases in other areas that they're just developing now. I can't remember the name of that development, but it's this enormous area. Right now, the parts that are actually under development, these massive areas that we show a little bit of, that's only 1/5 of what will be in about 5 to 10 years, what will be devastated there, because these companies have now got their leases in place to massively expand this.
In Ireland, we have an ongoing problem with Shell, because Shell, when you heard the natural gas, they got paid and they sort of basically stole it and sold it back to the country, and because there's absolutely national outrage about it, Shell had to completely rebrand themselves, and people boycott Shell, so they changed their name to Topaz.
Right, yeah.
And there's people going on hunger strike and stuff like that, and it was kind of a real national sort of movement. Is this kind of because I'm totally new to this whole thing, is this really well known by Canada, or is it kind of?
I think it's a lot more well known now, just in the last 2 years maybe, or 3 years, but yeah, I think it still needs to be a lot more visible, really. But yes, it's because every oil company basically in the world has some stake in this, because this is the future of oil. This is, when all the easy to extract oil is gone, which will be fairly shortly, this stuff is left, and so every company knows that, and they're all, buying it. So some of these Aboriginal communities, we were talking to some of the leaders there, and they were saying they're getting phone calls from China and from India, from all these huge companies that want to buy up these leases. So yeah, it's the world's attention is focused really on this area right now. But Canadians are not really understanding, I think, what's going on in the backyards literally in the front yards of these Aboriginal people who live right there. So yeah, I think we need to notify people a lot better about what's going on there.
Is there any research going on about how sand can be substituted?
Well, the companies they claim that they're doing this reclamation process, and they showed us some place where they said they made it back to the way it was, but it's pretty clear that it's not. And also right now, the way our government's the oversight of oil sands development is just ridiculous. The companies are in charge of policing the laws. So literally, the review boards for petroleum extraction in Alberta are populated basically entirely by former members of the boards of the oil companies. So not surprising that there's never been a breach of these laws in Alberta's history, from what I understand. So the fox in charge of the hen house, as one of our elders told us. So some of their laws exist, but they're just not properly being policed, basically. So yeah, that's something I think that Canadians need to know about as well. That we need to have proper oversight for these these corporate practices.
How long ago was the make this study?
It was in 2009, so I guess we started in 2008 and finished it in 2009.
At that time, when you were doing research, or did you hear anything? Was there any discussion at the time of pipelines and gas pipelines?
I think Gateway was under discussion at that time. I don't think the Enbridge. I'm actually not sure now. Actually, now I think back. But really, I mean, the Mackenzie pipeline is also in some ways connected to this. Like the whole infrastructure of Western Canada is actually, in some ways, either feeding into it or feeding out of it, because to the enormous amount of energy required to extract that oil, they need to burn huge amounts of natural gas, and so they're actually going to be piping that in from the north, and just using it to get at the oil. And then now, so these oil pipelines, certainly the oil pipelines are much more in the news, obviously, just in the last year or so. But I think these companies have been thinking long term on this for a while. But yeah, I mean, those pipelines, they're entirely because of the oil sands development, right? So all this stuff, it's just like these tentacles that all reach right back to Fort McMurray, basically. And even it's going, further out, and even, refineries that are further east in Canada as well, they're all sort of dependent on this development in a way. So yeah, certainly all of Western Canada's economy, and I think really in some ways all of Canada's economy is very much tied into this right now. And there's a lot of political credit at stake for this as well, for the federal government as well as for the provincial governments in Saskatchewan and Alberta. So, yeah.
I want to go back to this question about the national parks, because Northern Alberta has parks as well. And Northern Alberta is just like from outer space you can see the tar sands, and you can also see, I think, the world's largest beaver dam is up there in,
That's right.
In the, is it Woodlands Park?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. In Alberta, in Northern Alberta, right? This huge beaver dam. So on one hand, this amazing kind of thing that preserves the land, and the other, this thing that's destroying it. But they're both visible, right, from outer space.
Yeah.
And when I think about the greenhouse gas emission map that you're talking about, it's really important to think about these places that are far away as being related to where we are,
Yeah.
because when air, water circulates, it's all related. And
Absolutely.
it's easy to kind of think about those things out of sight, out of mind, but actually it's not that far.
Yeah,
So
that's very true.
my question, I guess, is around stories, like whether it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever, like how you decide which stories, because you're listening all the time to all these things, like how do you figure out which stories they are that you can pull?
Wow, yeah, that's a good
I don't
question.
know if there's an answer to that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it seems to me with the oil sands issue, it's one that I keep returning to in different genres. I've written poetry about it, I've written essays about it, and this novel and the documentary. It seems like I keep trying to find a way that will, basically shake people and wake them up, and it seems to be not, enough. So I think in some ways that's it's an issue, a story that I'll be probably continuing to retell in different ways for a long time. And also I think partly just because the more I learn about it, the more I see its impact on individuals too. To me, stories, are so much about, about a personal connection, right? And I work with storytellers a lot, and that personal connection of having a storyteller there in the room with you is an amazing thing that can really, can really have an impact on someone in a way that a more distant kind of medium doesn't necessarily do. But I think all of our media, whether it's film or writing or storytelling, is trying to get at that in some way, to make that personal connection, to move people in a literal way, to sort of make them actually move themselves to do something new. So I guess, I don't know if that's really an answer to your question, but yeah, this point about the national parks and the provincial parks, I think I can't remember the name of it, I think it's called Buffalo National Park, right? That actually is right beside Fort Chipewyan. And one of the elders that we interviewed there was sort of the elder in residence at the national park. And he was talking about how the incredible changes that have happened in that park. And the watershed of the Athabasca goes right through that park, right? So they're poisoning this incredibly, intensely downstream, and it's flowing right into the national park. So, and yet at the same time we have this notion that our national parks are places of pristineness, where we're preserving that away from development, but actually it's just all obviously flowing in there.
And living up to the architecture.
and then go past Fort Smith and then into the Arctic. So these things are connected, right? And we like to compartmentalize, or at least I think the corporations like to think we can compartmentalize and keep something pristine while you're poisoning the hell out of something else that's right beside it. And it just doesn't work that way. Containment just doesn't work, right? And we like to compartmentalize, in terms of there's some psychology, and we like to think we contain our waste materials. But really, it just doesn't happen that way in the natural world or in terms of psychology either. You can't repress something forever; it eventually comes back. Right? So I think it's a similar kind of thing in the natural world too.